You saw the red flags, the cold silences, the mixed signals, the hollow apologies, and still you stayed. Maybe you even ran toward it. You told yourself it was chemistry. You told your friends you wouldn't understand. But in the quiet hours, the ones where no one was watching, you felt it. That ache that was too familiar to be new. Why do we do this? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who mapped the unconscious, believed that the people we're most drawn to are rarely random. He wrote, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event." In other words, we don't just fall for people, we fall into mirrors. We are pulled not by who they are, but by what they reflect, the part of us we lost. The part of us we were never allowed to become, the part of us that still waits to be loved without condition. There's an old tale about Bluebeard, a mysterious man who gave his new bride the keys to his castle but forbade her to open one door. Of course, she opened it. Inside, she found the bones of the women who came before her. That room held a truth she wasn't supposed to see. That story isn't just a warning about others, it's a warning about ourselves. Because some relationships are locked doors we enter anyway, even when we know better. Even when something deep inside whispers, "Don't go there," and still we go. Not because we're foolish, but because a part of us is trying, in its own confused way, to return home. When you meet someone who wounds you in a familiar way, it isn't chance, it's memory. And the body doesn't just remember kindness, it remembers what it had to survive. That's why chaos can feel like love. That's why criticism can sound like care. That's why their silence can echo louder than anyone else's words. What you were drawn to wasn't safety, it was the hope of rewriting the past. You didn't stay because you didn't know better, you stayed because something in you believed if you just love them hard enough, they won't leave. They'll see you, they'll stay, they'll rescue the part of you that was once abandoned, shamed, forgotten. But they won't, because they were never the answer, they were the echo. That's the dangerous beauty of the shadow. Jung believed we each carry an invisible companion, the shadow self, made of everything we hide, suppress, deny. And the moment we meet someone who embodies those disowned parts, we feel magnetized. Not by their character, by our own reflection. That's why you couldn't let go. You weren't just in love with them. You were in love with who you thought you'd get to be through them. That version of you that would finally be enough. Finally safe, finally chosen. And here's the twist. They didn't just reflect your longing, they reflected your forgetting. The parts of yourself you've abandoned in exchange for being loved. This is why some people hurt us and still feel like home, because home wasn't always safe, it was just what we knew. You weren't chasing love, you were chasing relief. And now you see it. This wasn't about weakness, it was about the soul's attempt to repair its oldest wound using the wrong hands. So no, you weren't stupid, you weren't naive, you weren't broken. You were trying to find the door to yourself. And the one who hurt you? They weren't the door, they were the room, the forbidden one, the one filled with truth. And you were the one brave enough to open it. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is where it gets harder. Not because it's wrong, but because now it's yours. The wound has a name, the mirror has turned. And what you see isn't them, it's you. The truth most never hear is this. Attraction isn't only about what's beautiful in another, it's about what's unfinished in us. The shadow isn't a monster, it's a vault, a psychic storeroom of the feelings you were told not to feel, the anger that got you punished, the sensitivity that got you mocked, the independence that made others uncomfortable, the love that was never returned. And because those parts were rejected, you buried them. But what is buried doesn't die, it waits. And eventually it returns, wearing someone else's face. The man who won't choose you reflects the part of you that still feels unworthy. The woman who criticizes you mirrors the voice you inherited from childhood. The one who manipulates your emotions activates your own forgotten longing to be seen. This isn't punishment, it's projection. Jung called it one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. He wrote, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." You think you're falling for them, but you're falling into yourself. And that's why it's so hard to walk away, because leaving them feels like leaving a piece of you unfinished. You want them to stay because you believe on some unconscious level that if they stay, the part of you they mirror will finally be safe, healed, real. But it doesn't work that way. Healing isn't them choosing you, it's you choosing the part of yourself that they were never meant to carry. It gets more complicated. Jung spoke of two inner archetypes, the anima and the animus. The unconscious feminine within the masculine, the unconscious masculine within the feminine. These aren't gender roles, they're soul structures. And when undeveloped, they don't just shape our relationships, they haunt them. A man might project his anima onto a woman, expecting her to carry his emotional sensitivity, his vulnerability, his longing to feel. A woman might project her animus onto a man, expecting him to carry her clarity, her anger, her right to speak. And when these projections collapse, as they always do, heartbreak doesn't just feel like loss, it feels like identity shattering. Like the mirror cracking in your hands. That's because what you lost wasn't just them. You lost the fantasy of who they were supposed to be. The unconscious hope that they'd complete what you could never give yourself, and in that loss is your invitation. To take back what you projected, to reclaim what you gave away, to stop outsourcing your soul. There's a quote by James Hollis, "What am I asking of this other that I ought to be doing for myself?" The answer to that question is everything. That's how the pattern breaks, not by finding someone better, but by seeing more clearly. By recognizing that the people we call toxic are sometimes just stand-ins for our own buried truths. And yes, some people do harm, some people lie, some people use. But the real freedom begins when you stop using them to avoid facing yourself. The moment you say, "I wasn't in love with them, I was in love with who I hoped I could be through them," you begin to wake up, not to perfection, but to truth. And truth is what ends the trance. You didn't fall in love with a person, you fell into a memory. Attraction is rarely rational, it doesn't consult your checklist. It doesn't care about your logic, it finds the bruise beneath your skin and whispers, "Let's go back." You don't chase what's good for you, you chase what feels familiar. Carl Jung called it projection, Freud called it repetition compulsion. But what it looks like is this: you meet someone and something stirs, not butterflies, alarms, but you mistake it for magic. Your body tenses, your chest tightens, your thoughts loop, and you call it love, but it's not love. It's recognition. You're not responding to them, you're responding to someone else. The person who didn't see you, the one who made love conditional. The moment you learned that being wanted meant being in danger, this is how the pattern begins. Jung wrote, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." You don't see them. You see the part of yourself that still aches, the part you buried so deep you forgot it had a name. That's why they feel so intense, because you're not just trying to love them. You're trying to finish a sentence that was left incomplete in your childhood. You're trying to prove that if you can just love hard enough, the ending will be different. And it never is, because projection doesn't bring healing, it brings loops. You replay your history with a new cast. You assign them the role of the person who once failed you. You hand them your script and wait for redemption, but they never read it, because it was never their story. You say, "I just want closure," but what you really want is to go back in time and be chosen. You want the wound to heal by being erased, but healing doesn't come from reversal, it comes from recognition. And here's the hardest part. Even your triggers are mirrors. You feel abandoned because somewhere inside you abandoned your truth. You feel criticized because you've internalized a voice that's not even yours. You feel rejected because you've made yourself invisible in exchange for being accepted. The people who hurt you aren't just hurting you, they're revealing where you're still hurting. That's why the story feels so loud. That's why they feel bigger than they are. They're standing in the echo chamber of your past. There's an old myth, the Fisher King. A king wounded so deeply his entire kingdom withers. The rivers run dry, the land turns to dust. No one can heal him until someone asks a single question: what ails you? That's what your shadow wants to know. Not, why did they leave? Not, why did they hurt me? But what in me was already bleeding when they arrived? Your triggers aren't mistakes, they're trailheads. They lead to the place inside you that needs attention. They're not warning signs to run away. They're invitations to come home, and yes, it's easier to blame them. To call them toxic, to call yourself too sensitive, to scroll through another reel on trauma bonds. But none of that makes the wound conscious. You can memorize the theory, you can name the attachment style. But until you sit with what's underneath, until you ask, what part of me keeps playing this out? The pattern continues. You'll keep calling chaos chemistry, you'll keep calling control stability, you'll keep mistaking intensity for intimacy. Until you don't, until you recognize the shadow not as your enemy, but as your forgotten child, tugging at your sleeve, asking to be seen. And when you see it, the story begins to change. Not because they changed, but because you stopped needing them to. You can't go back and rewrite the beginning, but you can end the chapter by writing something new. You weren't just falling in love with them, you were falling into a part of yourself that wanted to be healed through someone else. But healing isn't handed to you, it's owned, it's earned. And it begins the moment you stop blaming the mirror and finally turn toward the reflection. There's a moment, quiet, unglamorous, when the story turns. Not when they apologize, not when they come back. But when you stop waiting for either, you sit alone, maybe on the floor, maybe in your car, maybe staring at the same message for the 100th time. And something clicks. It's not clarity, not at first. It's grief, not over losing them, but over how long you've been losing yourself. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. The moment you stop chasing mirrors and start reclaiming what they reflect, because you see it now, the cycle wasn't about them. It was about the part of you that believed love had to be earned. The part that mistook longing for intimacy. The part that stayed loyal to pain because it was the only thing that felt like home. You weren't cursed, you were repeating. Repeating the blueprint you inherited, the rules no one said out loud but you still followed. Don't need too much, don't speak too loud. Be easy to love even if it kills you. But now you're starting to question the rules. Why did I need their approval to feel enough? Why did I stay in rooms where I was shrinking? Why did I call it love when I was just disappearing more quietly? That's the break, not dramatic, not cinematic. But seismic, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And suddenly everything shifts. The highs no longer thrill you. The chase no longer entices you. The silence no longer feels mysterious, it feels hollow. And for the first time, you don't want to go back. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving you. So it's not a clean process. You'll grieve the fantasy. You'll miss the illusion. You'll ache for the version of them that only ever lived in your hope. But every time you choose peace over chaos, every time you choose your voice over silence, every time you don't text back, you build a new self, piece by piece. Boundary by boundary, and this is what no one tells you. You don't become stronger by staying in the fire. You become stronger by realizing you never had to burn to be real. You realize that intensity isn't proof of love. Consistency is, safety is, wholeness is. And suddenly the people who once pulled you in don't feel magnetic anymore. They feel heavy, like the weight you finally decided to put down. James Hollis wrote, "We are not who we think we are, but who we are afraid to be." You've been afraid to be someone who walks away, someone who says no, someone who no longer sacrifices their soul for a seat at a collapsing table. But now you are. You don't need a new relationship to prove you've healed. You need a new relationship with yourself. One that doesn't require performance, silence, or survival. You are allowed to be your own closure. You are allowed to be your own turning point. And yes, the loneliness will come, but it won't be the loneliness of abandonment. It will be the loneliness of expansion, the quiet that comes just before rebirth. Because this isn't the end of the love story. It's the beginning of the one that finally includes you. And this time it won't require you to disappear. It will ask you to be fully here as you are, flawed, whole, enough. The cycle ends when you do the unthinkable. You stop looking for love in the places you lost yourself. And for the first time you come home. Some wounds don't ask to be healed, they ask to be heard. For years you tried to outrun it, you read the books, watched the videos, blamed them, forgave them, blamed yourself. You forgave yourself, but nothing stuck because the wound wasn't looking for resolution, it was looking for recognition. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious will keep repeating itself until the truth becomes undeniable. The people we call toxic often carry more than their own patterns. They carry the outline of ours. They awaken what we've been too afraid to feel, too ashamed to name, too exhausted to face. You didn't just love them, you needed them to show you the part of you that still believed pain was proof of love. And it worked, but not the way you imagined. It didn't heal you, it exposed you. It held a mirror to the most tender, abandoned part of yourself and said, look. You saw the way you begged for crumbs. You saw how quickly you forgave the same offense, again. You saw how you twisted yourself just to avoid silence, rejection, disapproval. And under all of it, you saw the child, the one who wasn't nurtured, only tolerated. The one who had to perform to feel visible. The one who mistook emotional chaos for intimacy because peace never felt familiar. That child doesn't need another person to stay. They need you to finally turn around and say, I see you. I won't leave you again. That's how the pattern breaks. Not through punishment, not through logic, but through compassion for the part of you that thought suffering was a requirement for love. There's a quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, if you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. You've spent years trying to close the door, but maybe the wound was never the problem. Maybe the wound was the way. Every unmet need, every betrayal, every moment of self-abandonment has been pointing somewhere. Not to them, but back to you. You wanted them to love you in the way you could never quite love yourself. To stay when you would have left you. To soothe the voice in your head that always whispered, you're too much, not enough, hard to love. But here's the paradox, they didn't fail you. They mirrored what you still believed about yourself. And once you see that clearly, you stop needing them to change. You stop needing closure from people who never had the capacity to open. You stop begging for a love that would require you to abandon yourself to keep it. You see, now you didn't just fall for a person. You fell into a sacred wound, one that was never meant to destroy you, only to initiate you. You fell into the room you always avoided, the one with the silence, the questions, the rage, the softness, the truth. And when you didn't run, when you stayed alone hurting awake, that's when the healing began. Not the fixing, not the forgetting, but the integrating. The pain was never a punishment. It was a portal. Through it, you remembered your boundaries. Through it, you remembered your worth. Through it, you finally understood love is not supposed to hurt more than it heals. Not every connection is a soulmate. Some are shadow mates, sent not to complete you, but to reveal what you've exiled. And yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's hard. Yes, some days the silence feels like a scream. But you are not who you were before the pain. You are someone who has seen their own depth and lived. And when you look back, you won't thank them. You'll thank yourself for walking through the fire without losing the flame inside you. Because that was never theirs to keep, it was always yours. At first, the silence felt like absence, like something missing, like a life you almost lived. You missed their voice, their attention, their chaos. But underneath all that, you missed who you were when you imagined they'd save you. That's the thing we never admit. Sometimes it's not the person we mourn, it's the version of ourselves we thought they'd unlock. The one who would finally be chosen, seen, loved, but you see it now. That version doesn't need them. She needs you. He needs you. The mirror has turned. You no longer look to others to find yourself. You no longer need to be cracked open to feel real. You no longer confuse emotional hunger with spiritual depth. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. You were looking outside, you were dreaming, and now you're awake. This doesn't mean you won't love again. It means you'll love differently. Not to be completed, but to be mirrored in your wholeness, not your wounds. The sacred mirror is no longer distorted. You see yourself clearly. Not perfect, not finished, but whole. You don't need them to validate your worth. You don't need their apology to believe your pain was real. You don't need to suffer to feel connected. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose someone who chooses you without needing to break first. You are allowed to stop the story mid-sentence and write a new ending. You've learned what love is not. Now you are ready to remember what love can be. No more auditioning, no more rescuing. No more shrinking to fit their version of you. You were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person, but the right person. The one who will love you in the places you used to abandon yourself. They arrive when you do, fully, bravely, without the mask, without the old script. This is not the end, this is the return. The return to the part of you that doesn't have to perform. The return to the part of you that was never lost, only waiting. And if this video was your mirror, then maybe you were never meant to be saved. Maybe you were meant to see, to wake up. To walk out of the pattern. To walk back into yourself. And if you did, then this was never just a story about toxic people. It was a story about you, your becoming, your sacred remembering, and that is love. If any part of this reflection showed you something true, share what you saw. Someone else might need your mirror too.